Hi, and welcome to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation focused on youth mental health. Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to let you all know that all content that is found in our podcast is created for informational purposes only. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, treatment, or therapy. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition, and never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard in this podcast. Thank you so much, and without further ado, let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving. Today, with us, we have a renowned guest, James Anderson, who's joining us from Australia. He's a speaker, consultant, advisor, and educator on learnership and growth mindset. He's the author of 5 books, including Learnership, which I have, which we'll be diving in today. He has created the Mindset Continuum, the Learnership Matrix, and much more. One of my favorite parts is the equation for growth, where growth equals skillful teaching times skillful learning. In our podcast today, we're going to focus on what's in our control, skillful learning. But before we continue, James, please introduce yourself.
Well, Surat, I think you've done a fantastic job of introducing me yourself. Look, I was a teacher early on in my career, and I got really passionate about the learning side of things. At university, I was taught a lot about teaching, but I got really interested in what students had to do in the classroom and why one student could learn much more quickly and much more effectively than another. And to cut a long journey short, that's what's led me to this work around learnership.
Is that what inspired you to continue research in the field of learnership then?
Look, it's always been a passion of mine to help students succeed, to help students grow, to help not just students, adults as well, and to work out the best way to do that. I think my career has been dotted with a whole lot of really fortunate and insightful meetings and coming together of minds of some really great learners. People like Art Costa and Bennett Kalick, who were founders of the Institute for Habits of Mind and really put me on the path to understanding the types of behaviours we needed to engage in to be effective learners. The work of people like Anders Ericsson, who talked about the process of growth, the virtuous practice and the 10,000 hours that we need to go through to create talents and abilities that, countered that idea that we had to discover what talents we had. Ericsson said, you haven't got any, but you can build any you want. And so he described that sort of work. Then there was the work of people like Carol Dweck. You mentioned my Mindset Continuum and how important that idea of understanding you're capable of change. And when I brought all those ideas together, Carol Dweck's work on mindset, Art Costa and Bennett Kalick's on habits of mind, the work of Ericsson around practice, and another author, Nicholas Taleb, around being anti-fragile. Those ideas sort of coalesced in my mind, and the idea of learnership sort of grows very slowly, over 20 years into what it is today.
And you mentioned learnership, which is the book that I want to dive in today. So what does learnership itself mean? And what is the learnership matrix?
Learnership is the skill of learning. A lot of people, when we talk about learning, they think it's sort of one-dimensional. We learn. But in fact, like any other skillful activity, we can do it as beginners, we can do it as we develop, and we become experts in those areas. Just like when you went to school and you started to write, you wrote with 3-letter words and lots of spelling mistakes and those sorts of things. But as you developed that skill, you got better and better and better at it. Most people don't see learning that way. They don't think they can get better at the learning process. They can get better at what they're learning, but not at how they're learning. And so learnership as a concept seeks to raise the status of learning from an act, just something you do, to an art, something that can be done skillfully, beautifully. And the Learnership Matrix, what that does is tries to define what it looks like to be what I call a non-learner, someone who doesn't really participate in learning at all, a beginning learner, someone who treats learning as just a series of activities to complete, a performance learner who's always obsessed about doing their best, but's fearful of trying to stretch and do better than their best. A directed learner who is someone who basically needs a teacher to tell them how to learn, that leaves the learning process in the hands of someone else. An independent learner, which is something that a lot of people talk about, that is someone who takes charge of the learning process for themselves. But I think we can aspire to greater. And I talk about an agile learner. And an agile learner is someone who embraces challenges as a pathway to growth, that cultivates their habits of mind so they are constantly learning to behave more intelligently, that tailors feedback and designs mistakes and invests their effort in their own growth. And they're the sort of people that are constantly getting better at getting better. And it's interesting when I think back, and you can tell me too if this resonates with you. When I was at school, some kids seem to learn faster than others. That happened, yeah. And I was always told as a student that some kids are just smarter. Some kids get things quicker. And there was those very, very fixed mindset messages that some kids could, some kids couldn't. And what I've learned over the years is that's just simply not true. It's not that those students or those children are smarter than the other students. They've just learned to be better learners. And whether they've done that deliberately or incidentally, they've picked it up from their parents or whatever, the fact that they're learning more quickly is a result of what they've learnt, not who they are. It's what they do. And it's something that we can all learn to do. It's interesting that we sometimes think of skillful learners as being smarter somehow. It's not true. They've just learnt to do something that we haven't learnt.
Yeah, so there's six types of learners on the Learnership Matrix, like you said. So the bottom one is the non-learner who does not want to learn. Then on next is the beginner learner who's there just to complete the work. Then there's the performance learner who's obsessed with just doing the best but not getting better. And then the better types of learners are the directed learner who does work but only what's directed. Then there's the independent learner who takes charge of their learning. And then the best type is the agile learner who are constantly improving themselves.
Yeah, and I think it's important when we talk about them too, and I know I do this all the time, it's shorthand of doing it. We shouldn't talk about them as types of learners. We should think about them as levels of learners. It's like when you think about something like the martial arts, and they've got white belt, yellow belt, brown belt, whatever order they go up to black belt. That it's not that you're a beginning learner and I'm an agile learner or something like that. It's that you're currently at the beginning learner stage and you're learning to become a directed learner and an independent learner. So it's not a type, it's just a level that we're at a particular time.
Okay, so not labeling them as that type, but that's just where they are currently.
Yeah,
Okay,
where you are,
so
not who you are.
yeah, I like that. So, how can we identify what type of learner we are? And then once we find out, how can we move to the next level?
Yeah, that's a really big and important question. To identify the type of or the level of learnership you're at, we've got to look at your behaviours. And I've actually got a diagnostic that I promote on my website. And you look at your response to challenges. When someone says, here's something really hard to do, how do you respond? Do you say, I don't want to do that at all? Do you say, can I have something easier, please? Can you say, can I have the one I already know how to do? Or do you sort of go, do I have to do it? Can you tell me how to do it? Or is it more asking, as an independent learner would, is this a challenge I want? Or as a agile learner, great, I love challenges. This is going to help me grow. Doesn't matter what it is. And so you look at that response to challenge. And in the same way with your habits of mind. Your habits of mind are part of your language for learning. Any area of expertise has a language around it to help describe what it is. And so the habits of mind are a part of that language. And do you not know what the habits of mind are? And you can go through the Learnership Matrix. I'm sure in the show notes you'll have a copy of the matrix that people can download. And just ask yourself, what do I typically do? And it won't be all the time for every task, but ask yourself, how do I typically behave? And that'll help you identify the level of learnership you're at most of the time. In terms of how to change, the first step is knowing what level you're at and asking yourself what's holding you back. And that's a much, much bigger question to answer. But I will say that very often the thing that's holding you back is your mindset, all right, your understanding that you're capable of change. A lot of people don't become skillful learners because they don't really understand learning in the first place. They think learning is about discovering what they're good at rather than creating the abilities, the things they want to get good at. So your mindset is a big one. And the second one is often about your relationship to challenge. How do you feel and how much? A lot of people, when they take on things that are really challenging, they go into what I call the learning zone. They feel uncomfortable and they feel like they struggle and they takes effort, and they think all those things are a sign of deficit, a sign of weakness, and so they run away from them. Someone with a growth mindset and someone who's trying to develop themselves as a skillful learner recognizes that that feeling of discomfort, that struggle, that effort and all the rest of it isn't something to be shied away from. It's something to lean into, something to be embraced. And I love the term, I wish it was my term, it's not. Adam Grant, who wrote a fantastic book called Hidden Potential, used the term that we need to become creatures of discomfort. And I love that. A lot of us, when it comes to learning, are creatures of comfort. We want the learning to be easy and straightforward. And that's going to keep us in our comfort zone. But when we become creatures of discomfort, we lean into that challenge. We lean into the uncertainty and the effort that's involved, because that's where the growth happens. If we stay comfortable, if we stay doing our best all the time, we don't really grow. We can do more things, but we don't get better. And they're the two places I would start with most people in terms of becoming a better learner.
Okay, so to find what type of learner you are, you look at your behavior and your habits of mind, and then to change what level you are and move to the next one, you first have to know where you currently stand, and then ask yourself what's holding me back, which is usually your mindset or like a subconscious belief. And then we have to change the relationship with challenges. So transforming a challenge from a weakness to something that would help me.
That's a fantastic summary. Well done.
Thank you. So next I want to ask, could we be different learners in different areas of our life? For example, I could be a beginner learner at school and an independent learner in my extracurriculars.
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. And I think the best answer to it is to say, look, I would describe someone as the top level that they most often behave that way. But it doesn't mean that in all areas, we always need to be pushing ourselves to grow. So if I'm an agile learner or an independent learner, there are times when I go, I just need to get this stuff done. It's easy. Let's just do it. And I just complete activities as if I was a beginning learner. But it means I can gear up though. I can take on other challenges. And the reason behind that is not everything is as important to you. And I think that's fair enough. That there are things in my life that I don't want to get better at. I don't need to get better at them. And I'm okay with that. And this is a mindset issue. But I think the way to think about it is like this, that there's a big difference between not getting better at something because you don't want to and not getting better at something because you don't believe you can. Your question was about, can you be a better learner in one context and not in another? I think you can choose to engage in a lower level of learning because you don't need to or don't want to be a better learner in that context. If that's a choice, then that's okay. If you've decided, look, I don't want to get better at cooking, I don't want to get better at, whatever it is that you've chosen, and that's a choice you've made, knowing that you could, that's all right. Um, but if you don't think you can, if you don't know how to get better and just go, oh, this is all I can do, I think that's an issue.
So it depends on if it's like a priority, like you don't need to be a good learner in this area, but it depends. If it's a choice, then it's fine, but if it's a belief, then it's not.
Yeah. And I
So
think the other thing too, if I can add to it, is that an agile learner, the top level of learner, will always take the challenge because that it might be that I'm not particularly interested, I don't need to be good at this, but they go, well, I'm going to spend the time in this lesson, I'm going to spend the time doing this. Why not spend that time sharpening my skills? Why not spend that time getting better? I was listening to Jane Goodall. Do you know Jane Goodall, the lady that worked with the chimpanzees?
yes.
Yeah. I was listening to her speak a little while ago, and she said that one of the lessons she learnt in her life was that if you're going to do something, do it well. You're going to be spending the time doing it anyway. So why spend the time just doing an average job when you can push yourself and develop new skills? And the thing with taking on a challenge and taking on those, even though you might be particularly interested, mightn't see an immediate need, that the agile learner will take on the challenge in the spirit of JFK when he said, we do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And doing hard things helps you grow. And when you grow, look, the area you grow in, maybe you use it, maybe you won't, but you'll develop skills that you will use in other areas. And that's really important to recognize that, you're going to spend an hour, a term, a year in that class, in that, and you can either waste that time and nothing changes. You can use that time and, produce the work that's asked of you, or you can invest that time. And the actual work you do may not have any immediate advantage to you, but learning to do hard things, that's always going to be an advantage to you. Actually, it reminds me of a story. I had a colleague one day say it like this. He said he was made to learn Latin when he was at school. And he went home to his dad and he said, why am I learning Latin? I'm never ever going to need to learn Latin. This is a waste of my time. And his dad said, because Latin's hard. And learning hard things is a really important skill. I think that's a good attitude to take towards those subjects, those topics, those areas that you don't necessarily think, why am I doing this? I don't really want to get better. Well, actually, I can use it to learn to get good at doing things that are hard.
Yeah, so I understood that the agile learner thinks that you're using the time or you can invest the time, so might as well just invest it. And so while we're here on the topic of an agile learner, in the book you mentioned that an agile learner has agency, and which are the three key characteristics there's just three key things, and the three things are the will to act, environment to act, and power to act. So could you please expand more on these 3 points?
The will to act is what we spoke about a little while ago. Well, first of all, I should come back. Some of your listeners won't know what agency is. So someone without agency in the world feels like the world happens to them. Right? They're the victim of their circumstances, that when challenges and things come along, they duck for cover because they don't know how to respond. But someone with agency in the world is the master of their circumstances. They don't let the world happen to them. They go out and happen to the world. And it's a very deep and a very philosophical, theological sort of concept to be talking about, that can we be agents in the world? Can we make a difference? And I think particularly when we're talking to young people like you want to be able to go out and make a difference to the world, I'm guessing. Is that a fair thing to say? Yeah, absolutely. And so if you want to build agency in the world, to be the sort of person that can happen to the world, that's not going to be the victim of your circumstances, you need these 3 elements. And we talked about the will to act before. The will to act is the mindset part. And when I said there's a big difference between someone who doesn't get better at something because they don't want to and someone who doesn't believe they can. That's the mindset part. For someone with a fixed mindset, when challenges happen, they look inside themselves and they ask, can I do this? And if the answer is no, then there's not much they can do about it. They don't think they can change, and so they become the victims of their circumstances. But someone with a growth mindset comes along and the challenge happens. They go, well, I can't deal with this today, but I'm capable of becoming the person who can deal with it tomorrow. And so you can approach that challenge with right, well, it's going to beat me for the moment, but I'll change and overcome that challenge in the future. And that's where learnership comes in. Learnership is the ability to change. It's the ability to leverage those challenges, to change yourself into someone you're not today, to build those new talents and abilities, and succeed at things that were impossible today and make them possible tomorrow. So mindset, the will to act, learnership, the power to act. Those are things you've got control over. You can come to understand yourself as a learner and develop a more growth-orientated mindset. You can develop your skills as a learner and become a more effective learner, become an agile learner. The part you don't have a lot of control over is the environment. And this is important because if the world wasn't changing, if the world was very stable, you could learn what you needed to learn for the rest of your life while you're at school and go out and do it for the rest of your life. But the world's not stable. And back in the 70s, we used to talk about how the illiterate of the 21st century weren't going to be those that couldn't that couldn't read and write. They were going to be those that couldn't learn, unlearn and relearn because there was so much to learn. But we've realised now that it's not just about how much you've got to learn. It's about the complexity of it, the challenges, the nature of that learning that's taking place. And this is where learnership comes in, that the most important skill you can develop is not what you're learning in school, the specific skills, but the most important skill you can learn is the ability to learn itself. And when you get better at getting better, you can confront those challenges in the environment. We said the will to act, the power to act, and the environment to act. This world is throwing an environment at you that is more challenging, more ambiguous, more volatile, more uncertain than it has ever been. And this is where I mentioned Nicholas Taleb's work earlier on. Nicholas Taleb talks about things that are anti-fragile, and it's a beautiful concept. We all understand what fragile is. You disturb things and they break. And things that are fragile in a challenging, changing, volatile environment will break. Now, you don't want to be a fragile person. We've talked a lot, at school, you've probably heard the term resilient, and we want students to be resilient in life. Resilience sets the bar too low. It says that when challenges come along, you bounce back from them and you recover from them. What Nicholas Taleb talks about is developing the capacity to be anti-fragile. And what he means by that is that fragile things, you disturb them, they break. Most people would say, what's the opposite of fragile? They'd say strong or robust or resilient. And Taleb would say, you've missed the point. He would say that things that are anti-fragile don't just resist change or bounce back from it. They actually benefit from that challenge. And that's what someone who's an agile learner does. That, like we were talking about a moment ago, that when that challenge comes along, they go, right, I'll use this challenge to help me grow new skills, to help me become smarter, to become a better learner. And every time you encounter that challenge in the environment, which, for your generation in particular, is going to be coming along more and more rapidly and more challengingly, if I can use that term. And so you've got to lean into those challenges, become that creature of discomfort. Every one prepares you for the challenges of the future. And that gives you agency in the world.
Yes. So
That was a
there's
lot to
a
summarize. See how you go for
yeah.
summary.
So there's three things. There's the will to act, power to act, and environment to act that we just touched on. So the will to act, which is your own mindset. So that a fixed mindset person would think, oh, they don't think they can change, but a growth mindset person would think, I am capable to do this in the future. And then the power to act is the power, like the ability, can you even act, which is what learnership is about, the ability to change and act. And then the environment, it's like the world, and the world changes, so that's not in our control right now. And then you also mentioned about being anti-fragile, so benefiting from challenge because it'll help you grow, which is what an agile learner thinks. And then earlier in the podcast, you mentioned about Anders Ericsson and this quote, learning is not a way of reaching your potential, it's a way of building it. So this ties into my next question about the growth mindset continuum. So what are the different levels and how do people in these levels think and behave?
About the mindset continuum you're talking about? Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of your listeners will be familiar with Carol Dweck's work. And Carol Dweck describes two types of learners. Two types of people. Someone with a fixed mindset, someone with a growth mindset. Basically, someone with a fixed mindset says, this is me, get used to it. The person I am today is pretty much the person I'm going to be in 10 years' time, just older. And when you see yourself like that, you spend your life looking inwards. You ask yourself, who am I? What abilities do I have? And you look to discover your potential and your talents. Someone with a growth mindset, on the other hand, sees the world very differently. Someone with a growth mindset sees the world like, this is me today, but I change. Not just a little bit, I change my most basic abilities, my talents, my abilities, my intelligence. It's all up for grabs. I learn and I become the person I want or need to be in the world. And one of the big differences between the fixed mindset and the growth mindset is that someone with a fixed mindset doesn't get learning. They think learning is about discovering their abilities, working out who they are, where they fit in the world. Someone with a growth mindset understands their capacity to learn and to become the person, to develop the skills, talents, and abilities they need. Understanding that difference between the fixed and the growth mindset, which Carol Dweck does so well in her book, it's just here somewhere on my bookshelf there, and all her research around it, really highlights the importance of mindset. And people have gone out and read the Carol Dweck's book or watched the videos, whatever it is, and gone, fixed mindset, growth mindset, that's terrible, this one's really great, but lost the nuance. Because the idea of fixed mindset and growth mindset is really important for understanding the concepts. But for changing your mindset, you've got to realize that there's not two types of people in the world. It's not someone with fixed mindset and someone with a growth mindset. In actual fact, we all lie on this continuum somewhere. And that continuum between fixed and growth does a couple of things. One, it helps us recognize that it's not a case of which am I, it's a case of where am I? And that's really important because once you identify where you are on that continuum, you can ask some questions. You can start asking, well, why? Why am I at this place on the continuum? And most importantly, it helps us recognize that my job is not to have a growth mindset. And this is where so many people went wrong. They thought I've got to have, adopt or install or instill some sort of growth mindset. And that's not the job. What we need to do is to nurture, to nourish, to encourage an increasingly growth-orientated mindset. And so once you realize your job is to change, not to install, and to recognize that change will come slowly, we start looking at how we can do that. And the short answer to a very big question that you've asked about how do we change our mindset is to recognize our mindsets are default set of behaviors. It comes from what psychologists call our unconscious bias. It just happens. Like, when two people are confronting a challenge, one of them just goes, oh, I'd rather do something easy. And the other one goes, I love a challenge. There was no conscious decision there. That's just their default. That's the way they react. And so you've got to ask yourself, where did those beliefs come from? And when we look at where those beliefs come from, they come from all around us. They come from our parents, they come from our schools, they come from the movies we watch, the messages we receive. A lot of us grew up in families where you were the smart one and your sister was the artistic one and your little brother was the other one. And you mentioned Erickson's comment about potential. We grew up in the world where some people had lots of potential. And I'm really sorry, Surat, but you don't have so much of it. Or we were told that some people are just naturally artistic and other people never will be good at art. And these are all very fixed mindset messages. And we've got to start picking out that, I always thought that. My parents did tell me that I was this one and my brother was that one and that's why we were different. Or I really did buy into that message. As adults, some of the adults listening to you will have experiences where they've been the victim of a personality test. That someone's come along with a series of questions and said, oh, James, you're a red LMPT. And you go, really, am I? That means you're going to be good at this, this, and this, and you won't be good at that. And you've been categorized and labeled. You used the word label before. And so we've got to recognize where those messages came from and then start challenging them and to say, is that actually true? Are there people out there that are just naturally good at stuff? And I'm not one of them. And you look at the work of people like Erickson, and I've got Erickson's book up here somewhere too. He's got this one. If your listeners are interested, Erickson's book, Peak. Unfortunately, Anders Ericsson died a few years ago, but his work is extraordinary. Erickson was the world's expertise expert, and he asked two broad questions, or led a field, I should say. He's not the only person who did it, but he led a field that asked two basic questions. They looked at people that were enormously talented, that were at the top of their fields, and said, have you always been good at this? And basically the answer was no. They all started out as beginners and they all developed slowly through this process of virtuous practice or deliberate practice and developed their skills. And the second question they asked, which I always find fascinating, was that, all right, knowing that you were amazing as an adult, were you different as a 4, 5, 6-year-old? Should we have known who you were? Can we now learn something about who you were back then? And so go into your classroom and look at you and go, yeah, you mightn't know it now, but you've got something special. But your friend, sorry, not so much for her. We'll set her bar a little bit lower. And the answer to that question was no. That there was nothing about who you were that predicted your future success. What mattered wasn't who you were. What mattered was what you did. And what these people did that got to the top of their fields had a more and a better quality of practice. They had particular support arrangements around them, teachers and mentors, those sort of things. And they had more sleep, because doing the sort of work that it takes to get better requires, it takes a lot of energy out of you and you need to sleep more. And about 10,000 hours of that sort of work built those talents and abilities. And so where we hear those very fixed messages about potential, one of Erickson's quotes that I love about him, he said that learning's not a way of discovering your potential. Learning is a way of building your potential. And I really don't like the word potential because it has so many fixed connotations to it. And people ask themselves, what do I have potential in? They're waiting to discover, they're waiting to have the talents and abilities for free. And they don't come from free. When in my work, I talk about effort is the currency of growth. You've got to invest that effort, like we were talking about before, deciding to take on the challenge rather than take the path of least resistance and doing the easy stuff. You've got to invest in your own growth, not hope to one day discover the thing that you're good at and just wait for it all to come easy to you. So I think I answered your question.
Yeah. So the growth mindset continuum has So basically, it started off with Carol Dweck's work, which was just a fixed and a growth mindset. But then this continuum adds more types in between. So you could have a low growth mindset, which is still better than a fixed, but it's not at like a high growth mindset. So there's different types of levels in this too. And some of like the behaviors that are included are like the worldview, like effort they put in, the view of other people's success, and how they take feedback and help.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think in the show notes we'll include a link for people to download that continuum. And I hasten to add that Carol Dweck's work, when in her research, she always recognizes that fixed and growth isn't two things. Like she recognizes it's a journey, it's a continuum. She wrote about fixed and growth to highlight the importance. But in all her research, she talks about her participants responding to surveys. How strongly do you agree with this? From not at all to very strongly. And she recognizes that there is that continuum, that variance of mindset in between. I've just gone in and I have gone in and described what that looks like and broken it down for people so they can understand one, what it looks like, the different components of it, like you mentioned, the worldview and how you respond to mistakes and effort and those sort of things. But I think importantly, recognize that when you're working on your mindset, it's not a matter of adopting or installing a growth mindset. It's about recognizing it comes from these foundational beliefs and changing those beliefs, learning to understand your capacity to grow takes time. And you've got to unpack and unpick those beliefs and challenge them. And that process, each time you do it, makes you slightly more growth oriented. And that's the real strength in the mindset continuum that I've developed.
And I liked how you just answered one of the other questions was how do you get a growth mindset? What you just said, so you recognize the belief that's holding you back and you unpack it and see where is this coming from? It could be like a childhood thing from school, you picked it, and then you change the belief and then you're on the path to be on like a high growth mindset.
Changing beliefs isn't easy.
Yeah. So
You've got to really, really ask yourself, I've always been told people are just different. Is that true? And you've probably done lots of things like, based on that belief for a long time. And unpacking that, looking at the data, looking at all that, it takes a real focus, a real intent to change that mindset, which is why it's so hard. People can't just have a growth mindset because Carol Dweck said we should. It takes a lot of work to change your mindset. Excuse me.
yeah. So like I asked earlier, is it possible for me to have a different mindset in different aspects uh, of the continuum? So, for example, could I have a view of someone with a low growth mindset when others are more successful than me, but my view on feedback could be like someone with a high growth mindset?
Yeah, I think that is true. What you'll find when you look at that continuum, or your listeners look at that continuum, is they'll look at those different aspects like the worldview and your response to mistakes and so forth, and find that they sort of snake their way through. It's not sort of like one band that you're in. And the reason for that is you've had different experiences in those different domains. Your response to mistakes. You might have been the person who was always told, don't make mistakes. Mistakes are bad. If you make a mistake, you're not smart. And have a really negative fixed mindset view of mistakes. But in another part of your life, you might have been told there's nothing special about those people. They just worked really hard to develop their skills and abilities, and you can do that too. And you might be looking at the success of others and going, wow, that's something I can really aspire to be like. So you can have these different experiences in different domains and end up in different places, which is also why I think a lot of people you meet are in different places on that continuum for different aspects of their life. They might have a very growth orientated mindset around maths, for example, that I can always get better at maths and mistakes are okay in maths because you can fix them and do those sort of things. But when it comes to writing or when it comes to sport or when it comes to something else, they go, oh no, I'm never any good at that. And it's because we've had different experiences in those different domains that we have different mindsets towards it. The one that you did mention that I would argue is probably the best indicator of where you sit sort of overall is that worldview, that one that I put on the top of the mindset continuum. That fundamentally, how much do you see your capacity to change? That's the one that's, I can't change it all. I can change some things about me, but in limited ways. I can change pretty much anything. There are no limits. That's the one that's going to be a big indicator for you.
Okay, so basically everything comes back to the experience and your beliefs.
Those experiences drive your beliefs drive your actions. Those actions tend to be reinforcing. Once you're told, you're not good at that, how much practice do you do? None. Your experience then becomes, I'm not good at that. That reinforces your belief, which reinforces your actions, and it just becomes this cycle of your beliefs and your actions reinforcing your behaviours. And it's not until you really start challenging those beliefs that you change your actions, get a different set of results, experience something different, and go, maybe I can change a bit. That changes your belief, and that's the way it works. So that sort of cycle of beliefs, actions, experiences, and how the experiences impact your beliefs, and round you go, is the catalyst for how you change your mindset.
Yeah, and then like you said, the belief impacts your action. Once someone told me I was really bad at this thing, so I did not practice that at all. And I did notice that it impacted my belief.
Yeah. If you don't practice, you're not going to get better. So
Yeah.
you end up 30 years old and going, I've never been able to do that. And you sort of go, how much practice have you done in the last 30 years? Oh, none, because I'm no good at it. Surprise if you're not, there you go.
Yeah. Thank you. So today we talked a lot about like the learnership matrix, and then we did the mindset continuum and all the different like where you could stand in each of them, and we learned about the agile learner and agency. And my last question for you today is, how can our audience learn more about you and your work?
Okay. This might be the last question for me, but it's not the last question of the podcast because I've got one for you in a minute. So just be ready for that. To learn more about learnership, mindset continuum, and the work I do, go to jamesanderson.com.au, have a browse round and see what you can find there. A lot of my work currently is focused on teachers and students and just education space, but I'll let you in on a little secret. I'm currently writing a book for parents about how we can help our children, how we can help guide our children to become better learners and nurture a more growth-orientated mindset in them. So jump on my website. There'll be a book appearing, maybe by the time you actually listen to this podcast, about how we can develop those skills in our in our children. And down the track, I've got an idea to write one for just everybody as well. But at the moment, most of my work is for teachers and students. So jamesanderson.com.au is the place to go, and I'm sure there'll be a link in the show notes along with those other resources we mentioned.
I will be looking for your book for everybody that you're going to release soon.
Now, before you wrap up,
Mhm.
you have, and I was thrilled when you sent me the summary of the things you'd learned from my book, because I didn't write my book for you. I
Yeah.
wrote my book, that Learnership, the book that you've read, I wrote for school principals. So to have someone, how old are you, Sarat?
I'm 14.
14. To have a 14-year-old reading this and taking lessons away from it is just so heartwarming for me. And I was thrilled to get your invitation to be on the podcast today. So I think it'd be great if we could finish the podcast with, what have you taken away? What are your key lessons from reading? You probably haven't read every page because some of the pages would be really boring for a 14-year-old. But what have you taken away from learnership?
Okay, well, one of my key things that I took away from your book was the learning expectations, that when you're like sitting down and you're going to start like working or anything, you should expect that it's going to be hard, not that it's just going to come easily and you'll just breeze through it and you'll be done in 5 minutes, that it'll actually like take some brain work, and that's what's going to help you grow. So that's something that I actually put more awareness into after I read your book.
That's beautiful. You know what that means to me? It means you're becoming a creature of discomfort. That you understand it's that discomfort that Yeah, I wish I'd written those two words, but they're Adam Grant's words. I'll leave the credit to him.
Awesome. So thank you so much, James Anderson, today for taking your time out to share your wisdom. I am going to be waiting out for the book, and I'll also observe when I see people what type of learner or where do they stand on the growth mindset continuum. So I hope our audience took away something too. Thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on the show today.
Thank you.
You are listening to Mindful, Beautiful, and Thriving, a podcast series by Tharaka Foundation. As part of our youth series, we will be releasing new episodes every month, so make sure to continue to check those out. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we thank you so much for listening.